holidays from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Sorry, I'm trying to get all this open here. I'm going to cover the election here at the beginning, and then we're going to get into a few other things. And we're also going to get to hear from probably the only person, well, actually the only two people that I've seen in a long time that could get me out and vote. I have basically no trust in the political system anymore. But these people would at least do something to at least put a hold on the infringements that are being committed by government entities. So these two are basically the only two that I would have even left the house for. I was hoping that someone would step up and have not only the right philosophy, but the right principles and the track record. And, you know, people talk about Gary Johnson. Me personally, not my style of libertarian. I will say that he does hold a lot of libertarian views, but he is that you know, more of the I don't even know how to put it. He has more of the global outlook of libertarianism, which in a way is good if the globe had that ability to even vote or have a political system that has some type of libertarian lean to it, but that's not exactly happening all over the world. Then, you know, things like carbon tax and a lot of other things that actually don't support freedom and don't support the future for freedom, I believe. So it's one of those things that I don't hold the same principles in certain views that he has. Therefore, I wouldn't vote for that. Most people know I was a Ron Paul supporter. He's a different flavor libertarian. I tend to be more in that direction. I think it becomes a more peaceful and well understood philosophy on freedom. I even go beyond Ron Paul, but if you would look at the two different styles, um, I am more the Ron Paulian rather than the Johnson um, person. But I don't think that if you put him in the bunch of him, Trump, and Hillary, that I don't believe he would be the worst one. I just don't think that any of three of them are any better than the other. And that's kind of where I sit on that issue. Um, I'm debating on what to cover real quick. I have one that I do want a clip I want to play, but I also have this article I wanted to cover. This one covering Gary Johnson. This out of Reason.com. Military members are into Gary Johnson, but NBC won't let him near tonight's forum. The first ever forum devoted to presidential candidates addressing veterans and military related issues takes place tonight aboard the USS Intrepid, retired aircraft carrier that now serves as a permanently docked military museum in the Hudson River along Midtown Manhattan. Hosted by Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and set to be broadcast on both NBC and MSNBC at 8 p.m. Eastern tonight, the Commander-in-Chief Forum will be moderated by Today co-anchor Matt Lauer, who will direct questions to Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump and Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. Sorry, lost my spot. Before an audience mostly consisting of military veterans. As I noted here at Reason, shortly after the forum was announced in late August, Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson was not invited to participate, despite polling as high as 38.7% in a recent non-scientific survey about 3,500 active military members conducted by Doctrine Man. Another non-scientific survey of about 1,900 active military members conducted in July by Military Times and cited by the Iraq and Afghan Veterans of America founder and CEO Paul Reckhoff on Twitter puts Johnson at a distant third with about 13% behind Clinton's 20% and Trump's 49% support. Military Times noted that it's unclear just how popular the Libertarian is among current troops and veterans, but that their poll is representative of more senior and career-oriented troops and the men and women who run the military's day-to-day operations and carry out its policies. Still, this same poll, which is being used as evidence that Johnson's presence at the IAVA forum would somehow not be of interest to veterans because the two major party candidates are just fine, indicates that 23% intend to vote for a third party or write-in candidate. That's 3% points higher than most who intend to vote for Clinton, and that 61% of those polled are dissatisfied with Trump as the GOP nominee. For Clinton, the dissatisfaction index goes up to over 82%. It's worth noting that among the general voting population, Trump's unfavorable rate at about 55% with Clinton. Clinton's at about 52%. NBC, which apparently had the final say in the decision, and IAVA have faced a pretty loud backlash from pro-Johnson veterans, as well as those not committed to voting for the Libertarian candidate, but think his presence in major presidential forums would be a welcome addition. Some of these veterans have swarmed on IAVA's Facebook page to leave negative reviews and comments. Of the more than 17,000 reviews on IAVA's page, over 13,000 were the lowest one-star rating. The veterans group has reportedly since reached out to both Johnson's campaign and Green Party candidate Jill Steins and has invited both third-party candidates to participate in an additional televised IAVA Commander-in-Chief Forum. All but one that will surely not draw as many viewers or media attention. Johnson's campaign communications director Joe Hunter told Military Times that Johnson did not feel slighted by the process, and applauded the work of IAVA and other leading veteran groups in America who are giving voice to the national veterans. Hunter added that IAVA is a private organization that is not for us to try to dictate what they do, and that regarding some of the more aggressive social media protesting by pro-Johnson military members, we are not encouraging our supporters to harass anyone. We don't do that. Clearly, the rancor over Johnson's exclusion from the main forum has caused some consternation for IAVA. Rekoff took to his personal Facebook page last week to write, "Lots of people claiming to represent Governor Gary Johnson have baselessly and nastily attacked me and IAVA this week," adding that he had a great chat with Johnson before laminating haters gonna hate and trolls gonna troll. Also last week, Rekoff told The Hill, Mr. Johnson still does not meet the historical standard for general election meetings between candidates set by the Presidential Debate Commission, and noted IAVA also believes we have a responsibility to inform our members that, as of today, neither Johnson nor Stein has even posted a veterans policy section on their website. The historical standard Rekoff refers to is a mere 16-year-old and was implemented as a direct reaction to Ross Perot's unarguably affected third-party run in 92. But his comment about the lack of veterans section on Johnson's campaign website appears to have some effect, as the Libertarian now has a policy page devoted strictly to the veterans issues. Though the Johnson campaign and the IAVA have decided to play nice on this issue, Libertarian Party Chair Nicholas Sarwark told Reason in a phone interview today that the LP's position is that as long as IAVA plans to be a debate sponsoring organization, the group is required to comply with the same Federal Election Commission rules pertaining to having objective pre-established criteria if they want to remain a nonprofit and nonpartisan. Sarwark added that if IAVA wants to provide campaign contributions to Republicans and Democrats by offering them a stage and excluding the Libertarian Party candidate, that's fine, but they have to figure out how to reorganize where they can continue going forward without a tax exemption. Sarwark says he gave the Johnson campaign a heads up that the LP didn't think the separate but equal invitation for Johnson to participate in another veterans forum was acceptable or legal, nor does he think that what he describes as an after the fact, half assed rationalization by IAVA sets a good precedent, filing a complaint with the FEC over what he describes as IAVA engaging in partisan behavior while claiming to be nonpartisan is something the LP is considering, according to Seward. Some pro-Johnson veterans are planning on live tweeting the forum using the Twitter hashtag Military Votes Matter, and some planned protests are being scheduled to take place outside tonight's forum, which reason will be on hand to report when reached for comment. IAVA directed reason to its press releases and Rekoff's Military Times interview. This post will be updated if we receive a further response. And again, reason.com. So go check that out. Again, I'm not a Johnson supporter, but this is typical of what happens in a lot of these political games, what I like to call. And I think that this election cycle only proves that so much more. It's been a circus. We have Clinton up there with her own radical ideas and coughing up a lung all the time. Mysterious guy running around with what looks to be one of those, I forget how you pronounce it, DePazzo, I can't remember, anti-seizure pin, basically. It's one of those things that I look at it as we have no real choice. Everything that for many years now has been in the shadows is so blatantly out there. And we still have people when it's proven, it's in their face, it's the information's out there, it's not hard, and they will block it out with every bit of energy they have to remain in a fallacy, a false reality. And you know that there's a cognitive dissonance out there that I think a lot of it has been spurred by the non-trust in politicians, government, which that's justified, but it's not. The response we're getting from it isn't reasonable if we look at history. The techniques, the wars, the technology, all this will change. But it's the same philosophy repeating itself. And I think that's what people are missing. I do want to get to this reality check from Ben Swan here. And this is about the presidential debate moderators. And I think this is very, very important to cover. Give me a second here. Try to skip this.
schedule has been announced, and one of the most stunning facts that should stand out, who is moderating and why in at least 3 cases there's a massive conflict of interest. And that includes the forum set for tomorrow night. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Well, with the presidential debate schedule now announced, so have the names of the moderators. And there are at least some huge conflicts here. 3 names jumping out: Matt Lauer, Anderson Cooper, and Chris Wallace. See, NBC's Lauer, he will host a Veterans Affairs Forum with Trump and Clinton tomorrow night. CNN's Cooper, he will moderate a debate on October 9th. And Fox News' Wallace will moderate the 3rd and final debate on October 19th. So let's talk about the conflicts of interest here, because Matt Lauer and Anderson Cooper, they really have the same conflict. Both are notable past members of the Clinton Global Initiative. And because both are members of the media, they may have had their $20,000 yearly membership fees waived. Though NBC now says that while Lauer was a guest of the Clinton Global Initiative, he moderated a forum, and he was technically not a member. Clinton Global Initiative, many will say, has done very good work across the globe, but others claim that CGI was really nothing more than a pay-to-play scheme connecting multinational corporations with oppressive governments. Either way, both Cooper and Lauer have crossed a huge journalistic line, and both should recuse themselves as moderators. Now let's talk about Chris Wallace from Fox News, because Wallace himself, he has no clear connection to Donald Trump. Wallace is the sole moderator of the final debate, but he does have a very close personal relationship with former Fox News chief Roger Ailes. Ailes, who stepped down as CEO of Fox News after being hit by a scandal, is currently working with the Trump campaign to prepare for the presidential debates. Again, a huge conflict journalistically when someone that Wallace describes as a friend and the best boss he's ever had is preparing a candidate for the debate. Wallace should also recuse himself.
I like them. I respect the moderators. Yeah, right. I do respect them. It's interesting.
So what you need to know is that this issue is not whether or not the candidates are okay with the moderators, as Trump says that he is. The issue is why the debate commission has such a hard time selecting moderators in the first place. The commission claims it was because Trump has bashed so many members of the media, and Clinton, they say, has a, quote, unique relationship with the media. Look, we could talk about the Clintons and their close personal relationships with many members of the corporate media. We could also talk about the head of a massive conservative website, Breitbart, actually running Trump's campaign. But the truth is, the problem here isn't with the candidates. It's with the journalists who have forgotten, or simply don't care, that their primary role is to hold those in power accountable, not dine with them. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
Have you noticed that Trump has surrounded himself by media people? Hard to see who Hillary's surrounding herself by, because she's never out in public much, and when she is, everybody's talking about her coughing throughout her whole speech. And then we have Trump that surrounds himself by people from Breitbart, the head of Breitbart. You have Roger Ailes. Then people that he might not be surrounding himself by. He has some of his minions out there as regular guests on talk shows. What they would call the fringe, what they call us. Trump is using the media, and I pointed this out, that he plays in the motions, and this is why he is on TV all the time. This is why people can say he has that philosophy. Any news is good news. When Hillary seems to play, no news is good news. Trump doesn't care if it's a news agency slamming him, as long as he's the one in the media. It's a technique. It does work. Hillary for whatever reason, is staying kind of in the shadows. She did this throughout the nomination cycle. She likes to very rarely come out and do speeches and get out quick. She's not the media person, and it works for her. That's why it's very good possibility. Either one. Johnson, don't think he's going to get it, but he is going to get the people that want to vote, but don't want to vote for either of the two parties. Then you have people like me that are saying, I'm going to only vote if there's ever a possibility of a candidate that holds the same principles and values I do and morals that I do. Don't see him up there. Even if they are constitutional leaning, where I'm personally libertarian leaning. If they are constitutional leaning with libertarian philosophy and truly believe in it, people, I believe that they might look at, hey, if I do win, I have to play it in a way that it's not completely breaking down the system and causing chaos. You have to start a path in the right direction. You can't just snap and make it. We are announcing today we are now a full libertarian society. It doesn't work that way. And I think there's sometimes libertarians that forget that. I think hence why I'm one of those Ron Paul type people, rather than the Gary Johnson, because I hold principles that are not, saying, these libertarian ideas with the carbon tax and kind of going, we don't need to look at the Constitution all the time. And I'm not quoting him on any of this, but these are issues that I feel that I have with him. I think the one person that might have got me out is Rand Paul. I don't personally know Rand Paul. I can't say that he holds the values, but I've seen his father growing up. I know the principles that his father has held and stayed true to. And throughout the years also polished his view. He continued to educate himself while educating others. And I knew what he stood for. I believe Rand Paul, being brought up in that, might have a few things that he leans a little bit differently, but I think the core values that he was brought up with, he holds. No, magical person do I ever believe is going to get in that position. But I think there's either people that hold at least the majority of the values and principles you hold, and there's people that don't. And it's really up to you to decide what values you hold. I'm not going to demonize people that are voting for Trump because they believe in what he says, or even the ones that think, that's the best option, better than Hillary, and it's the only option they have. And I hope that people aren't going to beat up on people that decide not to vote. Because guess what? If these are the only people that we're going to look at, then expect people not to vote. I think there was a lost opportunity definitely back in '08 with Ron Paul. And I think there were major people that now are closer to what he was talking about and campaigning on than they were back when he was campaigning. And I don't even think they would be willing to admit that maybe they made a mistake, but I believe they made a mistake. And now we are seeing the consequences of those mistakes. And we all make mistakes, but at least admit that, hey, we should have had Ron Paul. And I don't know what America's going to look like after this election. But I believe that we will see a very drastic change from where we are, what we believe America is supposed to be. We're not going to see that America anymore. I hope I'm wrong. But this is what I see happening. But talking about Ron Paul, Ron Paul Liberty Report. I want to cue this up here. And this is battling big government from Washington. Ron Paul Liberty Report with Rand Paul. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully there's a chance for change. But if not, there's things going on in other countries and in states around the world, or around the U.S., that it's going to become a movement of either secession or banning America. And it might not be the people that believe in freedom that try to claim secession. It might be the radical socialists. Doesn't look that way now, but I also don't see secession happening now. And it might be the socialist, communist, fascist type people that eventually believe that they should secede. But let's go ahead and fire this up. Ron Paul Liberty Report, battling big government from Washington.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. I have a very special guest with me today. He happens to be a senator from Kentucky, and he happens to be my son, Senator Rand Paul. Rand, good to see you today.
Glad to be here.
Glad you're in town. We had a nice family reunion recently, and everybody was glad to see you. So I had to put you to work a little bit here and find out what's going on in the Senate. But you have a lot of things going on. First thing off is that it's 6 years since I attended your swearing in. And that means 6 years. I think every 6 years you have to get reelected. So you're in the middle of a campaign right now.
We're hoping to get you back to Washington for another swearing in.
No.
So, although it seems to be hard to get you to Washington these days.
Well,
but,
the swearing in would be okay, but I thought you were going to say, get me back to Congress. That's scary.
Yeah, no, I'm up for election, and Kentucky's a state that's been trending Republican, but our registration is more Democrat than Republican. And until recently, we've had mostly Democrat governors. Our state house is still Democrat, but they're conservative Democrats, and our voting for federal office has trended more Republican. So we think we have a good chance of reelection. My opponent is very wealthy and has put about $1 million of his own money in, and probably will put several million in more. So our main concern is just being prepared in case he puts a lot of his own money into the race.
Well, good. I think most people are optimistic about it, but one thing for sure, you've been around politics for a while, you can't take anything for granted. And this year in particular, ups and downs, there's no doubt about it. Now, you've been there not quite 6 years yet, but you're on three committees.
All right.
And the one committee, which was similar to the one I was on, is foreign affairs. You called foreign relations.
All right.
And you got on that rather quickly. It took me so long to get on that committee. So do you find that one of your more interesting committees to be working on?
Yeah, and it took me a little bit of work to get on it. And I got on it, I think, after I'd been there 2 years. But one of the interesting things is that I've tried to use it to discuss issues of whether we should be at war or not. So about 2 years ago, they were discussing a water bill for Africa, that they were going to give money to Africa, and they've been working on it for 7 years. And I was the only thing stopping it, and I decided that I would amend it with an authorization to use force or to not use force in the Middle East. So we actually had a discussion on it, and I ended up voting against the authorizations, actually, that both sides put forward. The Republicans wanted an authorization that would allow them to go to war in any country around the world, anytime, if there was a vague link to ISIS. And then the Democrats put forward one that would have to be renewed every 3 years, but had no geographic limit, so it could have been still war. And right now there are 30-some-odd countries that pledge allegiance to ISIS, and I just don't see a war that has no geographic limit and an ill-defined enemy that anytime a terrorist group pops up and says we're a part of ISIS, we would then be at war with that country. I think that is too much power given up to the presidency.
The two things that what you've been doing has called my attention, even though I don't see everything that you do, and I know you're real busy. But one was the bit of confrontation, altercation with your friend Hillary.
Secretary Clinton, and I'm glad to see your health is improving. One of the things that disappointed me most about the original 9/11 was no one was fired. We spent trillions of dollars, but there were a lot of human errors. These are judgment errors, and the people who make judgment errors need to be replaced, fired, and no longer in a position of making these judgment calls. So we have a review board. Review board finds 64 different things that we can change. A lot of them are common sense and should be done, but the question is, it's a failure of leadership that they weren't done in advance, and 4 lives were cost because of this. I'm glad that you're accepting responsibility. I think that ultimately with your leaving, you accept the culpability for the worst tragedy since 9/11. And I really mean that. Had I been president at the time and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable. The thing is that, we can understand that you're not reading every cable. I can understand that maybe you're not aware of the cable from the ambassador in Vienna that asked for $100,000 for an electrical charging station. I can understand that maybe you're not aware that your department spent $100,000 on 3 comedians who went to India on a promotional tour called Make Chi Not War. But I think you might be able to understand and might be aware of the $80 million spent on a consulate in Mashar al-Sharif that will never be built. I think it's inexcusable that you did not know about this and that you did not read these cables. I would think by anybody's estimation, Libya.
And this was one thing that we still may be hearing more about, because you were very blunt with her about, weapons leaving Libya and ending up in Syria. And I think you weren't making the claim as much as, what do you know about it? And she was rather indignant that you would ask her that.
Well, she acted almost as if, Senator, I've never heard of such a thing. Even though it had been in the London Financial Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that weapons were leaving Libya, going through Turkey and into Syria. It's also well known, has been written about by many people in the lay press, that she was the biggest advocate of not only the bombing of Libya, but then the arming of the so-called moderate rebels in Syria. This was all Hillary Clinton. And so when I asked her, do you know anything about, was the CIA annex in any way involved with this? And there's so much circumstantial information to think that they were. There was a shipment in the mainstream press, a shipment that went through Turkey, and it was described as chaotic. When they're unloading the weapons in Turkey, there's just people everywhere saying, oh, I like America. Will you give me a shoulder-to-air missile? And it's like, yeah, here's one. And but I think some of that was coming, and the CIA annex had something to do with it. Now, they maintain that the CIA annex was collecting the loose weapons that got loose when they got rid of Gaddafi. There were said to be 20,000 surface-to-air missiles, these man-pad missiles that were missing. So they said they were collecting them to get them out of the jihadist hands in Libya, but I think they were taking them from one jihadist group and giving them to another jihadist group, or one that was professing to be less of a jihadist group in Syria.
Well, there's hints now that your whole argument will be fortified if some of this information comes out from the emails, the Breitbart things. And he's hinted that you were exactly right on those charges.
And I think we'll find out. They're saying that in October more of these emails will be released. I feel comfortable that she was dishonest, though, and that she lied to me. She said she knew nothing about it. The Secretary of State after her, Kerry, when we had discussions with him, and I can't tell you what the discussions were, but he was very aware of everything the CIA was doing in Syria. There's no way the Secretary of State was not briefed on what the CIA annex was doing. She said she had no knowledge. That has to be a lie, that she had no knowledge of what the CIA was doing in Libya. Plus, she's got, the ambassador over there. She had to have directed him. Why was he there? What was he doing in this war-torn area?
Maybe that was her last lie that she'll ever tell. Who knows? But there's another thing that has been in the news lately, and we've done some programs on this. We've been very fascinated with what's going on with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And there's weapons. There's a proposal over $1 billion of weapons going to Saudi, and you have objected to this. And I want you to explain to the audience, how the technical advantage. This is something obviously wouldn't be available in the House, but you as a senator, by knowing the rules, you're able to at least call attention. Hopefully you'd stop it, but at least the big thing is that you're going to be able to call attention to what's going on.
Well, I think when you look at the overall region, there used to be sort of a balance of power between Iran and Iraq. Then with the Iraq war, with the Iraqi government gone, and then with more allied with Iran now, there's a strengthening of Iran. Iran has gotten more money because of the Iran deal recently. And so Saudi Arabia looks at that and says, well, we want ours too. And that Iran is now allowed to become stronger because of the releasing of this money to Iran. So Saudi Arabia wants $1 billion. But Saudi Arabia has actually gotten tens of billions of dollars of weapons under President Obama, more weapons under President Obama than any other president previously. But we've discovered a law back from 1976 called the Arms Export Control Legislation, or Act. And under that, there's a provision that says that any senator can object to an arms sale and force a vote, up or down vote. It's a privileged vote. They can't stop me. One senator by themselves can request or demand this vote, and it will occur. The other interesting thing we've discovered from the Arms Export Control Act is that it was written, and it says in it explicitly, arms cannot be sold to countries unless it's for the legitimate self-defense of the country. It's kind of hard to imagine how Saudi Arabia dropping bombs in a neighboring country has anything to do with the self-defense of Saudi Arabia. So really, even under the terms of the Export Control Act, I think they're in violation of that. And that's one of the points I'll bring up is not only can I demand the vote, I think I have good evidence that they're in breach of the act, in the actual essence of the act.
Does the law prescribe how much time will be spent, or will the Senate leadership determine the debate time?
They determine probably the debate time, but I have to request it within a specific amount of days under which it's announced. They're forced to come and tell us. And one interesting thing we learned is when we got involved with this about 6 months ago with Pakistan, we learned that they were supposed to be telling us when the arms sales came up. They were only informing the chairman of the committee and the ranking member. They were not telling the rank and file members. So now we've requested that they tell us anytime an arms sale is coming up. And I think they're going to ultimately rue the day, because I'm going to object to a lot of this, because I think ultimately the arms technology belongs to the taxpayer. We were all taxed to develop special tanks, special fighter planes, and they aren't simply a private business because we don't sell them, obviously, to our enemies. I think we need to be concerned about selling them to people who might be our frenemies, who might sometimes be our enemy, but sometimes be also opposed to us.
Now, you did get the vote on the Pakistanis, and the vote was not overwhelmingly in favor of your position, but it was
we
still
lost. But you can sometimes lose the battle but win the war. We got a little over 20 votes, about half Republican, half Democrat. We developed some allies. Chris Murphy from Connecticut, senator, who's a progressive Democrat, has allied with me on this. And even though we lost the vote, we got about 22 votes or so they got 60 some odd votes and they won. Even though we lost the vote, Senator Corker, who didn't vote with us, was also objecting to the subsidy that U.S. taxpayers were having to pay for these F-16s for Pakistan. And in doing so, Pakistan eventually, after the vote, just said, oh, well, never mind. So right now, we're not selling those planes to Pakistan. We actually won the battle of the taxpayer not subsidizing them.
Worthwhile. A congressman, now a senator, somebody I think you work with, and I was just wondering where he comes down on some of these issues. Ron Wyden, I've always found him to be a pretty honest, straightforward
He's
person.
been good on all the privacy issues, like NSA and things like that. We work together. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure exactly where he is on this. I can't remember how he voted. But on this issue, it was more Chris Murphy's been taking the lead, and he's been very interested in Saudi Arabia. So we're having discussion with his office. I don't know if he'll support the resolution at this point, but I know he supports the concept that basically we become complicit in anything Saudi Arabia does if they're doing it with our weapons. In fact, some of the tanks they want to get from this deal are tanks that are to replace tanks that they lost in Yemen already.
Mm-hmm. Now, you'll have this incident, you'll bring us up to get this vote. Is there anything else, especially in foreign affairs, that you might be working on or anticipating, any piece of legislation that's going through that we should be keeping our eye on?
Well, one of the things your viewers can do is write to their senators on this vote, because this vote will occur, and they should call, harass, write, email their senators to say, why are you selling these weapons to Saudi Arabia? And so I think that's of use. I think that there's going to be more of this coming up because there's so many contradictions in the battle in the Middle East. For example, this week we've discovered that Turkey now is rolling U.S.-made tanks into Syria. But they're not attacking ISIS, the people we like the least over there. They're actually attacking the Kurds, who are also with our weapons. So now we have U.S. tanks, M60 tanks, paid for probably by the Turks, but I mean essentially made and subsidized by the U.S. taxpayer, are now fighting against weapons the Kurds have that were also given to them as well. So we have weapons on both sides of battles now in Syria.
Yeah, that's awfully discouraging. We've talked a whole lot on this program, about Syria, and I think we'll be talking about it for a long time, and you're going to be involved with it too. But it's not very easy to get a consensus in the Congress to bring ourselves out. And quite frankly, I haven't heard from the two major candidates right now running for the presidency talking about backing off at all. Both say we have to rebuild our military. I don't know.
In some ways, it's worse. It's the worst case scenario, because not being there would be one alternative. All in would be another alternative. But what we're really doing is dripping soldiers in a little bit at a time, kind of reminiscent of the way we sort of got started in Vietnam in the beginning. A little bit here, a little bit there. Their advisors are not in a combat role, but they're in the midst of this, and we've already lost at least one soldier over there in the most recent battles. But putting a dozen people into battle and having our people call through 3 sets of lawyers to decide when they're allowed to bomb the enemy, and not being clear who the enemy is because there are civilians everywhere, is not a real good recipe for a victory, or a recipe for, I think, or fair to our soldiers to put them in the middle of a situation where they have to call 3 levels of attorney to decide whether to fire their weapons.
Okay, we're going to have to go in a minute too, but I wanted to bring up one other thing that you have brought up, and you've been very supportive of audit at the Fed, and you're okay on that issue for sure, but you've expanded it, and you got a little bit of attention, but not enough, and that is auditing the Pentagon. You I'm sure, saw this $8 billion. Oh, the books, we can't figure out where that $8 billion went. So does anybody join in auditing the Pentagon? And
we have a bipartisan coalition, and quickly on Audit the Fed, it took many years for you to get the momentum going, and finally you had every Republican, or virtually every Republican, and about 100 Democrats. You got bipartisan support. In the Senate, I worked 5 years. We finally got a vote, and we got every Republican save one or two, and then we only got 2 or 3 Democrats. That's our problem. We need more Democrat support to get Audit the Fed. But we got 53 votes, and we need 60. So we're not that far off passing the whole thing and putting it on a president's desk. On Audit the Pentagon, it's a bipartisan issue. I think Joe Manchin from West Virginia is on it, and it is insulting to the taxpayer. The Pentagon says we're too big to be audited, and that should be an insult to every taxpayer. And also, I personally think that national defense is the #1 priority of the federal government, but we shouldn't waste money. And so if you're putting money into $500 wrenches and $500 toilet seats, you're taking money away from actually money that could be spent wisely. But it's also important to know that the Pentagon spending since 9/11 in real dollar terms, in constant dollars, is nearly doubled in constant dollars. And so for people to say we're hollowed out and we're weak and we're at our weakest ever, we have the strongest military, the most advanced technology, and we have professional soldiers, which are better than conscripts. We are unparalleled in our military might. And if that's used for self-defense, that can be a good thing. And but we can't let them win the argument that, we have to double and triple the amount. And that was one of the points I tried to make in the presidential election, is everybody was like, we've got to increase the military budget by $50 billion. And I was the only one that said, no, we don't. We need to actually conserve what we're spending.
We frequently use a chart to show what we're spending on militarism versus what the other countries are doing. And it's almost, we spend as much as everybody else put together.
It's like the top 8 or 10 countries combined, we spend more than them. And it's been that way for decade after decade. So, really our allies need to bear more of their own responsibility. Okay. And there's much more self-interest when you're next to a country. Like if you live next to Ukraine, you have much greater self-interest in it than someone who lives 2,000-3,000 miles away.
Right. Anyway, we're finishing up. Rand, thank you for being with us today. I hope it was as much fun for you as it was for me.
Thanks for having me.
Very good. And I want to thank our audience for being with us today, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube and RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Check them out. Subscribe on YouTube. A lot more of those. Now, when we look at what happens in the military, we also have to look at what happens in the CIA. Gun running, this, that. We know that the CIA has, been responsible for creating situations which cause us to end up militarily intervening. I call it all propaganda show. I think enough people in government know, definitely at the very top, what's going on. And I think at times also the president's hand is forced. Now, I think at other times it's manipulated. Create a little problem to justify going in and handling it. In Libya, they couldn't get us to put boots on the ground, but no fly zones and stuff like that. We might not put military boots on the ground, but CIA's they're not military, but they are kind of like military. But anyways, we have a situation where things like audit the Pentagon. I don't think that would ever get passed. I think even like the Fed, audit the Fed. I think most people would say, yeah, audit the Fed. Full audit, not this BS audit they call audit. No, a full audit. Um, I think that we should have another look at the gold, the supposed gold that we have in vaults. I think we should allow multiple independent gold experts to go in and verify that what they're seeing is gold and what they're feeling is gold, and that from what they can tell, the amount that's in there would be somewhat accurate to what we supposedly have. But again, we just don't have a Senate, a House, a president, a judicial system that stands on the principles, the morals, and the values of what freedom really is. And even at the founding of the United States, there were discussions, there were arguments of, where do you draw a line? These were argued. And we're so past what they argued. In a way, we're proving what some of the people that were maybe too extreme, people that don't believe in the non-aggression principle, which I don't believe that's relevant to freedom, because then you do exactly the opposite of what freedom is by becoming the oppressor. I think that's why the non-aggression principle is key to understanding freedom. Because if you stray from the non-aggression principle, I'm not talking about defending yourself, I'm talking about being an aggressor. Once you become the aggressor, you become the oppressor, which is not consistent with freedom. We need people that hold those principles, those values, to become the system. And I think if we can do it more at the local level, it will only bleed into the federal level. Because when you have more libertarian, constitutionals, leaning local government, it kind of puts a hold on the federal government's attempts. Definitely, if the federal government tries to pull false flags. Now, I want to cover this article from Breitbart. If I can get it to load back up. try this again. Okay. Leaked Soros memos advance Obama's use of executive action. New York, just prior to the November 2014 midterm elections, George Soros Open Society Foundations held a board meeting at which the organization discussed how it could further the use of President Obama's executive action authority to bypass Congress during Obama's final 2 years in office. Notably, the event featured a lunch session with Cecilia Munoz, director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. The details were contained in a 67-page hack file detailing the September 29th, 30 through 30th, 2014 Open Society U.S. Programs Board meeting in New York. The file was reviewed in full by Breitbart News. States the document confident that Open Society goals can be advanced despite the political forecast for the remainder of the president's term. Our grantees are actively involved in exploring the possibilities of executive action in areas of USP, Open Society Foundation's U.S. programs, concern including racial profiling, the census, and voter registration. The board meeting's minutes state outright that Soros's organization was seeking ways to further the use of potential executive actions by Obama. There are 2 years remaining in the Obama administration, and it is projected by all that the anticipated results of the fall elections will make legislative accomplishments ads start blaring in my ear. But it says here, anticipated results of the fall election will make legislative accomplishments nearly impossible. U.S. programs, grantees, and of the Open Society Foundation's network more broadly are thinking about how the administration can cement progress on key priorities through executive action while also minimizing problematic developments with long-term consequences. Using 3 anchor grantees and a former senior administration official as discussants to detail their views of priorities and constraints. We will consider both the most promising substantive areas for executive action in areas from transparency to criminal justice to wage and labor rules, as well as how OSF might effectively further these. Foundation grantees are actively involved in exploring the use of presidential executive actions. The document related, confident that Open Society goals can be advanced despite the political forecast for the remainder of the president's term. Our grantees are actively involved in exploring the possibilities of executive action in areas of USP concern. including racial profiling in the census and voter registration. The foundation's U.S. programs had already begun to influence Obama's executive action efforts, the document relates. Whether the outcome of next month's elections, analysts expect continued gridlock in Congress, making any policy reforms that require legislation extremely unlikely. The president has telegraphed his determination to make progress on his priorities through administrative regulations and procedures, as he put it. I've got a pen and I've got a phone. USP has begun to influence administration's efforts as evidenced by our central role in launching the philanthropic partnership to the White House's My Brother's Keeper initiative to promote opportunity for boys and men of color, as well as our ongoing efforts to encourage broad administrative relief to some segment of the undocumented population following the elections. The Foundation's memo discussed areas of possible executive action that could fundamentally impact the U.S. political system. There are some areas of executive action that have especially long-lasting consequences, and other steps which would be critical to framing issues for the 2016 election and the next president. How do we balance the relative merits of each approach? The document notes the public pays less attention to the executive decisions during a presidential final 2 years, believing the president's powers are on the decline. Some of the most significant achievements of the Reagan, Clinton, and Bush presidencies took place in their final 2 years. The public must pay less attention to the election then, and the president's perceived power may be on the wane, but he continues to possess the same significant constitutional authority. Munoz, who served on the Foundation's U.S. Programs Board in 2008, joined the 2014 board meeting to discuss Obama administration's approach to select issues, criminal justice, immigration, and the remainder of his term. According to a summary provided by the hacked memo, the possible executive actions being pushed are sophisticated in their approaches, which range from broad and large-scale proposals to ideas more likely to fly under the radar. The hack file states our anchor partners in particular are thinking about how best to leverage the last 2 years, during which the president will have to adjust to lame duck status. The Open Society, together with partner grantees, assembled a general list of potential presidential executive actions on numerous issues such as the following: voter registration, including pushing online voting, direct health and human services to ensure that the federally facilitated health care exchanges created as part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, incorporate voter registration opportunities as required by the National Voter Registration Act or Motor Voter Act, and direct federal agencies to find ways to increase voter participation nationwide, issue guidance interpreting the Americans with Disabilities Act, which, with respect to accessibility of polling places, privacy when voting, and competence requirements, assist states with voter registration modernization efforts, including statewide database improvements, voter by mail, online registration of voting, and same-day registration, direct election assistance commission to develop new data collection points that provide greater insight into county-based election administration and the ways in which voters interact with election systems, number of votes cast, type of vote machines used, provisional ballot statistics. It should be noted that in January 2014, Obama's 10-person presidential commission on election administration released its recommendations for reforming the U.S. election process, including transitioning to voting via tablet computers and other technologies. The commission recommended software-only products can be integrated with off-the-shelf commercial hardware components such as computers, laptops, tablets, scanners, printers, and even machine-readable code scanners and signature pad products. Tablet computers such as iPads are common components of these new technologies. They can be integrated into the check-in voting and verification processes in the polling place. The Commission highlighted new technologies in which the voter can pre-fill sample ballots at home to be scanned later at the polling place. And I'm not going to read the rest of that. You can go to Breitbart.com, big government area, leaked source memo, Vance Obama's use of executive action. But it goes into using the Justice Department. And it's just again showing how corrupt our government is, but it also shows, someone that we've seen doing these things in multiple countries. Someone that is working, I believe, to become a world power. Someone that they want to be king of the world, or they want their family to be the royalty of the world. And really, with as much ability to create these situations in so many different countries, is he not acting as king of the world? Now we are kind of getting into this broadcast. I kind of want to change subjects, kind of being September, the 11th coming up, the anniversary. I see a clip from Mark Dice, and I got to play this. It's not that long of a clip, but when I'm doing this broadcast, I've kind of got my down moments just looking at what's going on. And it's been one of those things that I've been so busy, and then to sit there and spend all of my off time trying to catch up on all the news and do this, it's just like I want to see more positive news. But sometimes you can also find the news that, even though it's not exactly good news, you can laugh at the bad news, because it also reminds you that you at least look at issues, you research things, you expand your knowledge, and you're not just a walking drone. And the thing is lately I've been getting into, looking at pop culture, not for always entertaining properties. It's more to see what the generation, the newer generations are into, to see what influences them. Because we are looking at I believe, a radical change coming to America, and I think we have a population that not even quite miseducated, uneducated. That the ability for some to fly through school, cheat, whatever, and really come out with very little actual knowledge is unbelievable. And then we add Common Core, and really just that's leaked into a lot of private schools. So it's really amazing. But I want to play this Mark Dice clip. Oh, hold on. Okay, here we go.
What was the name of the organization that Osama bin Laden ran?
I don't know.
You don't know. What was the name of the terrorist leader behind the 9/11 attacks?
Wait, I always pronounce it wrong, but it's Saddam Hussein or something.
What is the man's name that was behind the September 11th attacks? Like the big terrorist leader. What was his name?
I don't know.
You don't know. What was the name of the terrorist leader behind the 9/11 attacks?
Don't remember. Saddam Hussein?
No.
Saddam Hussein?
I don't know. I thought this was going to be fun, and you just made this all serious.
No, life is actually very serious. It's
Yeah, I know. It's really sad stuff, but I'm at
just
the
giving
beach.
you a reality check today.
Oh, geez, okay.
What country were most of the terrorists from that committed the 9/11 attacks?
Iraq. Iran. Syria.
Nope.
Middle East.
Well, that's a region. What year did the 9/11 attacks happen?
2003.
What did the terrorist attacks of 9/11 start? What was the result of that?
A lot of people being scared about terrorists.
It was the beginning of the war
On Syria. A war
before the Iraq War. There's something else. That was 2 years later.
2 years later, after 9/11.
It started the war on terror.
Oh.
The war on terror.
The war on terror.
Okay. And then
Wow.
was the Iraq War.
Okay.
2 years later. Other than the Twin Towers, what other building got hit on 9/11?
I think it started with an E.
With an E?
Yeah. But I don't know the name of it.
Okay. What was some of the targets of the 9/11 terrorist attacks?
I don't know. I want to get a beer, man.
What year did the 9/11 attacks happen?
I'm good, man.
What's the answer?
I'm good.
What terrorist organization was behind the terrorist attacks?
I'm going to guess ISIS, but I feel like that's wrong.
Yeah, that's... Oh, gosh. Who was the terrorist leader behind the 9/11 attacks?
They say it was Osama bin Laden. But do we really know
Yeah, this man-
which facet of
Now,
that,
this guy's thinking.
that's what they say.
Okay. This man is thinking here. Let that sink in there for a minute, people.
That's what they say. Who knows? That's who the government pinned it on.
Good for you, bro.
Anything else?
No.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel at youtube.com/Mark Dice and stay tuned. New videos almost every day.
Mark Dice on YouTube. Go check him out. Subscribe. He does a lot of these on the boardwalk, on the beach, wherever. Interviews that really kind of expose where we are. You know, you had the one gentleman there at the end that actually knew what he was talking about. And it's amazing that people have no clue about Afghanistan. They think about 9/11, they think about Iraq. A lot of the millennials nowadays. I don't have a Common Core history book in front of me, but they believe Iraq is where we went. I don't hang out with too many people younger than me for the most part, but when I do, I'm amazed at what information that they either withheld from them or never sunk in because it wasn't covered correctly. But what you do find is a lot of them don't even know why we are in the Middle East, other than Twin Towers. Twin Towers came down. They don't have that great of a basic understanding of history. Even if you don't believe the official story, they don't even know the official story. Which, I seen it somewhat when I was in school. People didn't want to look at history. History is history. We're moving towards the future. Well, if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going, you're bound to repeat. And that's what happens. But I guess for me, I guess I'm older than I feel, because for me, it's not so ancient of history. But even when Ron Paul ran in 2008, when I've talked about that, people were kind of like, yeah, I wasn't into politics. Well, it's because they were younger. They might have graduated in 2008. They weren't into politics yet. And, it's one of those things, though, that I think that we have a generation, multiple generations now growing up in the post 9/11 period, that they don't understand how America changed. And it's funny because a lot of them go, well, we idolize the 90s. Oh, you idolize the 90s, huh? Well, what happened to the 90s? Where's those 90s at? What happened after the 90s? What changed when we got into the 2000s? After 9/11, we changed how we go about society. These millennials are growing up with not knowing what an airport without TSA and long lines. being a rare thing when something goes wrong with maybe one airport or one airline, but not a constant security, show me your papers, let me pat you down, and x-ray you and your bag. And they want to put TSA on highways that they already do at some bus stops and train stations. People forget that there was attempted bombing at the Twin Towers, World Trade Center, prior to 9/11. We didn't freak out. These things will happen. These things can happen. They don't happen all the time. And we've weathered through more. We had a large part of our Navy hit during Pearl Harbor. We had catastrophe. We fought a world war. We have had a progression of loss of freedom. But it's amazing the elevation it took after 9/11. We don't have people questioning it. We don't have people understanding even what caused it. Who did we blame it on? Who might have been involved? I won't bear. It's something that we as individuals that understand need to share, to spread, because otherwise we're looking at a lost nation. I don't want to have to leave my home. I'm sure many of you don't want to have to leave your home, whether with force or in a sort of underground railroad for people that believe in freedom. People that might be targeted for their beliefs. But if we allow misinformation, dishonest people, propaganda to go unchecked, and a false history being taught in our public school systems and now even our private school systems, federal government being involved, that our local school systems aren't being fully involved. Private schools being fully involved in what they teach. Let the best lesson plan, best teaching methods shine. Model it after something that shows the best progress among all students. And I think a lot of it goes back to individuals. I think that in the society we have now, your best option is homeschooling. But it will be an unpopular decision, among others. It will be work for you. And it will potentially, depending on where our government and society go from here, a danger to you and your family. And we've already kind of seen it happen. But when it comes to the education, the continuation of principles and values, this is the best option. There are some private schools, and if you find a private school that holds the same values and principles you do, that might be a good option for you, but not everybody can find that option near them. And again, that's where the homeschooling just seems to be one of the better options. And like I said, also, I'm seeing now a lot of private schools are now teaching just Common Core. And why? Well, a lot of these community colleges and private colleges are now starting to use a entry test into the college that is based off of Common Core teaching. In a way, they seem that they have to. Well, if all public schools are doing it, this is what will be the standard. So we have a catch-22 in that instant where the colleges are feeling like their hands have been forced to adapt to that. Therefore, private schools are starting to adapt to that. So now there are, again, some good private schools that will teach the correct way and then teach how Common Core does it. And it's funny, if you've seen the reaction of some of the students that have learned it a more traditional way, that's probably been taught for hundreds of years, to the new, then they get taught the Common Core after their reaction to the Common Core is similar to our reaction. They're like, are you serious? Like, you would do it this way? Why? Why would you do it the hard way? Because the hard way is easier. No, not exactly. So, we have a catch-22, but we see that there are ways to basically maneuver through that. And our history is going to be the hardest thing to teach. Because if you have schools that are ran, taught, and basically conform to false history and agenda, your child might not know the history that they believe in, even when it's false history. And we see a lot of false history. Now we see it from both sides. But there's a lot of stuff that I've seen a lot of these progressive, communist, socialist people that claims false history when it's not false history. it's only one side of history. You add both sides of history, and it's not what they claim. So we have it from both sides. Again, we're not finding the people that are willing to call out both sides. You're either against Hillary and voting for Trump, or you're with Hillary and not doing anything to prevent her from getting off. No, listen, I'm me. That's who I am. And I have principles, I have values. And if I do not share the values and principles and ideology of others, I should not be forced to pick one over the other to prevent one from getting in. And I won't allow my hand to be forced to do so. But I fear one day they will. Give me a second. Okay, sorry. Now, I probably won't play this entire thing. Okay, sorry. Okay, AMTV, Christopher Green, the Fed prepares for negative interest rates. Possibility, and it could shake us up. Here we go.
We're back. I'm here with special guest Marco Santarelli of Narada Real Estate Investments. I want to talk about hard assets, specifically real estate today, because the Federal Reserve of the United States, in fact, I got an email from one of our subscribers, and it just said this: Christopher, how did you know? How did you know? They send me a link. I go to the report. The major headline reads this: the Federal Reserve may be preparing for the unthinkable. Negative interest rates in America. Well, how did I know? I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future, but here's what I know. They can't raise interest rates meaningfully without a total collapse. They just can't do it. And again, I'm not just a pundit. I'm somebody who worked on Wall Street for some 10 years. I worked for a major Wall Street firm, managed people's money as a broker. I care about a lot of people. I saw a lot of people hurt in 2008 and 2009. I have a finance degree, studied economics. I've been to both private and public school. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know my work very well. And I know people like Janet Yellen can't raise interest rates meaningfully, without a total collapse. And I see a lot of defeatism. People are like, well, Christopher, if it's this bad, what am I supposed to do? It's almost like they just want to put their head in the sand like an ostrich. What are you doing with your money? What are the things you like? And I talk about this all the time. I talk about gold. I talk about land. I actually like land a lot. I talk about real estate. Marco, are you with us?
Thank you.
So, great having you on the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Let's dig into this. I mean, where do you think the trajectory of this is going? The Fed potentially could be preparing for negative interest rates, and I don't even think they have to go negative. I don't even think that has to happen. I mean, we've already essentially had interest rates, 0% for, going on 8+ years. The average business cycle lasts 8 to 10 years, right? They're forming this massive bubble. Trump comes out recently. This was today. It says, U.S. interest rates must change as Fed weighs rate hike. I mean, how bad do you think this is?
Well, Christopher, I think we're in a world of hurt, and most people don't understand that. If you drink the Kool-Aid from the mainstream media, and I don't watch the mainstream media, they're going to have you believe that everything is fine and that we're in this long economic expansion and that GDP is healthy, the stock market is at another all-time high. I mean, that's what you hear virtually every week, is that we're another all-time high in the stock market. But, I don't think it really matters politically who gets elected. At the end of the day, the Federal Reserve is a very powerful body. The politicians, I believe, personally, are just puppets that play into this larger game, this matrix, if you will, of bankers that control interest rates, control the world economies. And so, without going too far on a tangent here, I honestly believe that the Federal Reserve has painted themselves into a corner. They cannot raise interest rates, but if they do, it might be 0.25%. And the only reason they would do that is to save face, because they want to provide people, the world, the illusion that they still maintain some level of control. If they don't raise interest rates, as time goes on, people will start to think that the Fed is less and less significant. If they do raise rates, it'll have to be a very nominal quarter point in whatever range they lay out for, the banking institutions. But it won't change anything economically. And you're right, Christopher, they can't raise interest rates because we are so indebted as a country, and many nations are so indebted that the cost to pay the debt is astronomically high today. And if they raise rates, we're going to get to the point where we're going to be flat out bankrupt.
Yeah, and it's just, it's math. And you don't have to be the smartest guy in the world. What gets me is they constantly tell us that there's no consequences. Like, there's no consequences that rates are at zero forever to infinity. There's no consequences that rates are going negative in Europe and potentially here in the United States. There's no consequences that the national debt has doubled under the administration of Barack Obama, which, kind of leads me, I think, to a very important question our audience probably has swirling around their head. So if we're in a bubble, right, across, various asset classes, why and how is real estate, for example, as an investment an attractive option?
Well, whenever I hear the word bubble, I have to break it down a little more granular. The question is, what kind of bubble are we in, for starters? We could talk about stock market bubbles. We can talk about real estate bubbles. We can talk about bond market bubbles. We could talk about different bubbles. And even within that categorization, you have to start to ask yourself, where are those bubbles? Like if you're talking about real estate, for example, where it is. Let's break this down, Christopher. Let's start with the stock market. I just want to touch on this briefly. So how is it possible that we're in the third longest economic expansion in history? The only other two were 1961 to 1969, followed by the 82 to 1990 economic expansion. So we're in an economy that's been growing for 86 months, and that's a stretch well over the 58-month average that's a post-World War II expansion. But here's the problem. The pace of the recovery has been the slowest in history. The average annual growth right now is about 2.1%, where if you look back in history, it has averaged over 3%. So the United States has now gone on a record 10 straight years without a 3% growth in the real GDP, which is inflation-adjusted GDP. So in the last 85 years, the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, has calculated that the annual change in that real GDP has been like a 1 10-year stretch. Mm-hmm. Let me make sense of that. What that means is we have never seen a period in time where we have not been over 3%, other than in the last 10 years. So in the last 10 years, that real annual growth in the GDP has been subpar or sub-average. The last time we peaked was in 2006 when it was 2.7%, but it has never hit that high again ever since. So we're on the longest consecutive stretch of years in which the United States saw real GDP grow by 3% or better, post 2006. I'm kind of a little scatterbrained here because I'm thinking ahead of myself. I want to,
and I'll just jump in real quick. I mean, that's with the stimulus. I mean, essentially, we have no real GDP growth with the 0% interest rates, the artificial stimulus, quantitative easing to infinity, Operation Twist. I mean, this is all we've got. And, you know, I know there's a great argument, inflation versus deflation. Yes, maybe we see deflation in certain commodities like oil. We've seen oil prices collapse. But I see more inflation around me personally. You know, cost of food, goods, meat, milk, housing, rental properties, real estate, the stock. I mean, I see more inflation across the board. Is that your take also?
Yeah, thank you for cutting me off and kind of tying it together. And I'm politically agnostic, so I'm not really trying to tie this to anybody. Mm-hmm. But, you know, if you look at the greatest growth period that we've had where we were 3% consistently, it was 1983 to 1989 during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. But let me tie that back now, full circle, to the stock market and inflation. So how do you know if the stock market is inflated? And it's really hard to kind of put a measure to that because there's many different metrics you could look at. And if you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different opinions. But here's two things I look at, and I think these are pretty strong. First and foremost, Warren Buffett has gone as far as saying that if you take the total market capitalization, the value of all the publicly traded companies, and I believe that's, you know, the top 5,000, and divide that as a ratio into the gross national product, you get a number, you get an index, and he claims that this is probably the best single measure where valuations stand at any given point in time. So if you look at our country's total market cap, which is $21.4 trillion, and you put that over our total GNP of $18.4 trillion, you come out with 1.2. That's the number. And now here's why that's significant. That number is actually, if you want to define it in words, it's super bubble territory. The only other time we've been this high is in 1929, and I'm sure your listeners know what happened then. 1937, 1966, the year 2000, right before the dot-com implosion, and now. So we are back in that super bubble territory. So number two, I'll give you another ratio. And I know you're familiar with this, the price to earnings ratio. This is something that most stock or paper asset investors are familiar with. It's considered a normal range if you're in that 13 to 15% range. If you have a PE ratio of 18 to 20, that's generally considered overvalued. But where are we today? Today, we're around 26. The only time we've been around 26 in recent history is right before the 2008 recession, you know, the implosion of the stock market. So again, yeah, we're in extreme bubble territory. Am I concerned? Absolutely. Can you control the economy? No. Can I? No. Can your listeners? Not really. But what you can control, and this is my personal philosophy and my personal belief, is you can control your own personal economy. You can't control the greater economy or the world economy. And I think that's where your listeners need to focus.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in that. We were talking about that over the break. And again, I'm a believer, too, in taking action, right? You know, you just don't sit and look at the world and go, oh, my God, you know, there's hell, going to hell in a handbasket. You know, and we can all have our opinions, right? Mm-hmm. None of us have a crystal ball. I mean, for example, I personally think they're holding up the stock market because it benefits Hillary Clinton. I think the thing is rigged. I think it's a casino. I mean, this is a guy that was on Wall Street. I really do believe. I don't believe it's an organic, you know, supply and demand market where they allow us to have peaks and troughs and, you know, valleys and all this kind of thing. It just doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't.
You know, so I see the wheels coming off. So let's play this out in our minds a little bit. You know, we could have a worst case scenario, you know, post the election. Who cares? You said you're agnostic. Who cares? So Trump or Hillary, whoever gets in, there's going to be hell to pay, in a lot of our opinion, many of my listeners tuning in the not too distant future. You know, that's maybe worst case scenario. The wheels just absolutely, we have another collapse. It's worse than 1929, worse than 2008. I hope to God that it's not. You know, let's say that's the worst case. Best case, maybe we just kind of muddle along and we get killed through inflation and we just, you know, people are just looking for, you know, alternatives to manage their personal economy. So tell us a little bit more and explain to our listeners. So you've been in the real estate business for years. What do you do that's different in terms of looking at opportunities, looking for cash flow, rental properties, these kind of things that will be able to withstand long term, either scenario. The worst case, a okay case, maybe even a best case. Maybe they can keep this thing going for a couple more years and they'll take interest rates and slam them to negative 2%, creates even more inflation. I mean, how does all this work out, and what kind of things are you seeing on the ground?
Well, you've probably asked me 10 questions in the last 30 seconds. So I'll just kind of throw a dart and start at one place. First and foremost, I think people need to protect themselves by keeping their cash in hard assets, not paper assets, because in paper assets like stocks and bonds, mutual funds, that sort of stuff, the price of those paper assets could vaporize and disappear overnight. You know what the stock market can do. It whipsaws up and down and values will change. Whereas hard assets not only help preserve the purchasing power of your hard-earned dollars, your cash, but it allows you to protect and preserve and basically put it into a safe haven, for lack of a better description. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a gold bug, although I do place cash in gold and silver. I think those are two tremendously good places to put your dollars today. And I have a small percentage of my portfolio there just because it is an inflation hedge and it's a good protection. I don't look at it as an investment because my definition of an investment is something that generates cash flow. Those are the key words, the operative words. If you have regular income coming in, that to me is an investment. So gold, silver, certain commodities I do favor. Real estate to me is ideal, and I say that as both a description as well as an acronym, because I'll break what I mean down by ideal here in a second. But you're asking me a bunch of different questions. I'm not married to any one thing, but if I was to go out there and pick the ideal investment, again, no pun intended, I would say it would be income-producing rental real estate. It always has proved itself to weather every economic storm, every recession. The income keeps coming in. The values, I should take that back. The prices change. The value, the intrinsic value of those assets stay the same, but the price does change. So to babble on here a little further, Christopher, let me break down what I mean by ideal, because it is the ideal investment, but it's also an acronym. Real estate gives you income. That's the I in ideal. The D is depreciation. The IRS is, quote unquote, generous enough to give you this phantom write-off for 27 and a half years where you could depreciate that property and take it as a write-off against your passive income. There is no other asset class that allows you to do that. The E represents equity. The equity comes from the equity that's in the property, and that grows as you amortize the loan on that property if you have a loan. The A, obviously, is for appreciation, what a lot of investors focus on, and I think mistakenly, because it should not be the number one reason you invest in anything, including real estate. But you do have appreciation potential, and history has shown over time that real estate has been very consistent and a good predictor of future appreciation. And last but not least, that L is where wealth can be truly created very rapidly. I don't mean get rich quick. I mean faster than other options. And the L is leverage. What other asset class out there is a bank or lender willing to provide you up to 80% of the purchase price of that asset for you? In fact, many lenders are tripping over themselves to give you money.
Sure. Well, what came to mind was, well, if you're a hedge fund manager, you can, leverage yourself, 10 times, 20 times to one, borrow at the open, window at the Federal Reserve. But for the average guy, you have limited options outside of real estate where, again, leverage is everything. I mean, Donald Trump talks about this all the time as a real estate, tycoon, really, at least in his own mind. I mean, he's a big believer in leverage. Something I've always believed in is really just kind of hitting base hits. I never believe in any kind of, get rich quick scheme. If I do, I'm out the door. I know it's BS, but I believe in base hits, taking action. So, we've talked a lot about this. Obviously, we've become friends. Tell our audience, so how do you find properties? Are you looking, at undervalued markets specifically? Are you in kind of a targeted, price range?
Check out the rest of that interview. Go to AMTV on YouTube. Subscribe. That one was titled "The Fed Prepares for Negative Interest Rates." And, again, that's not a foolproof thing, having property, depending on it as always providing income. Definitely if you're not renting out portions of it, because, well, we've seen the housing bubble. If you're buying a whole bunch of rental properties and you're paying too much for them, and then the market drops off, now you can't charge the rent you were intending on doing. Therefore, you can't really do the upgrades you want to do, because now money is tight, and now you are running a rundown rental. You're becoming a slumlord due to inflated bubbles. But if you can afford to buy property and pay it off quickly, and then either do something to it to increase the value and sell it, or turn it into an income property. It's one way of leveraging, and like he said, also gold and silver, a good way to leverage against inflation. I've always said, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Bitcoin, gold, silver, property, seeds, things to protect your family, security. Everything has its place. And you have to spread your eggs out to ensure that you have a little bit of something for most situations. And I think nowadays there are a lot of people that have come to realize this. And we've seen prepper shows, we've seen survival shows, we've seen a lot of people that seem to be preparing for. A lot of times I don't even think they know, let alone us. But they're getting prepared. I think there's a natural instinct to prepare when you just get that feeling that you need to become this person that can withstand a lot. And I think we're naturally seeing that. What are we preparing for? I think we're just waiting to find out. Don't forget to go to ucy.tv, scroll down towards the bottom, and click the Amazon button. Shop Amazon through ucy.tv. We get a little kickback. You get the same great prices, same great shipping rates. And, that's what helps cover the operating costs on the network's end. And that's how you're able to hear so many different opinions and facts that you won't hear on mainstream media here on ucy.tv. Don't forget to go to My Patriot Supply. If you go to antityrannynews.com/MyPatriot, it'll take you to My Patriot Supply shop, My Patriot, to antityrannynews.com, and you help cover our operating costs on this end. A little kickback, and you get the same great shipping rate and same great prices. Thank you again for tuning in. Stay tuned here on ucy.tv. Great broadcast coming up.